So please, if you like, feel free to come up to the microphones. I will re-ask. Well, actually, I won't re-ask. I'm going to start off with quite a few questions. We have about 7 questions. And the first question is this: what core competencies in computing do different stakeholders see as key to modern undergraduate computing programs? Not everyone at once. Maybe, Brian, we start with you.
Well, from the keynote, it was clear that there's a need for a generalist, as well as these alchemists. So I think that a broad set of core competencies and a broad set of using computing in context by the time they complete their degree would be helpful.
Anyone want to add to that, please?
Hi, this is Pamela Norton with Borowczak. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm on my way up there. I'm in Denver right now, but I'm looking forward to meeting everyone in person. But we began designing a very high performance system on a chip for the US Air Force. And so what I'm seeing and what we would like to see from skills capability is students focused on, there's a lot of that's happening in the area of neuromorphic computing, right? So we're putting AI at the edge, we're embedding intelligence at the edge, we're computing at the edge, decisions will be made at the edge, which means autonomous cars to drones. So focused on areas of neuromorphic computing, homomorphic computing, which means you can actually compute on data while the data stays in a black box, is also really, there's been a lot of progress because we are putting more power at the edge. So we're able to process data in a way that keeps our information private, as we all are concerned about privacy issues and AI computing. That's another area that we'd really like to see education and classes taking on those. And right in the corridor down from us in Boulder, we're working with Cold Quanta, which is a quantum computing company using cold atom computing that actually came out of CU Boulder. So we're very excited. They're going to be launching their cloud platform at the end of this year, which means it's 100 qubits of computing power. And so for anyone, the basics of that is 100 qubits of power is actually more powerful than all the supercomputers combined together. So we really are wanting to see students looking at the algorithms that you design to quantum computing are very different than classic computers. So we are hopeful that we can engage students in recognizing this is obviously the future, and happy to share more on that, but sorry if that was a little bit of a deep dive, but it's an exciting area and we're happy to help drive some of that innovation.
Thank you, Pamela. I think we had a comment over here. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name's Jeff Downard, and I'm from Flagstaff, Arizona, faculty at Northern Arizona University, but I really wear 2 hats in addition to teaching in philosophy and law. My other background is to work on a new startup in the blockchain area. And so I think back to my own experience growing up, which was on a farm in Ohio. And I think about the life of a person growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, because my kids have spent a lot of time up in Wilson, Wyoming, because the grandparents are there. And so we know what this state is like. It's similar to Arizona in the northern mountains. And I ask, what would it take for a student to go through the community colleges, through the university, and come out and be ready to start a blockchain-based company, to have the kind of resources needed to draw on new and developing capacities, for instance, for quantum computing, which is very much at the edge of computing today, to be able to grow into this area and successfully make it through a startup in Wyoming? How could they become an employer in the state?
That's a great question. A couple of names are popping in my head who would be appropriate to respond to that, actually many. So if someone has a burning response, please indicate that now. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jane Alexander from the School of Energy Resources Biz Center.
And can you bring your mic just a bit closer? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Is that okay? I think it in part responds to your question and comments there. whilst we can always traditionally look at the technical core competencies that we can potentially predict to a degree and tick some boxes for those, I think we should bring to the forefront what we might more be likely to refer to as the other core competencies that, if anything, in today's day and age might be even more important. And I'm thinking of core competencies relating to computational thinking and critical thinking and cultural competencies as well. I think there's no substitute for the good old-fashioned curiosity that we hope that students and learners have. And I know one of the comments earlier on was that we would like students to have that. And ironically, young learners of 3 or 4 years old are great at doing that and asking the awkward questions of why. And we don't love it at the time, but then sometimes that gets lost. So I think what we might refer to as the other core competencies should be really prominent in the conversation today, that of cultural and critical thinking and computational thinking.
That's great. Thank you. I see that Ben Gortzel with Singularity.net has joined. I believe I see you up there. Maybe we have an opportunity to have you chime in. Or not. All right. Well, let's not be shy. I know there's a lot of, please go ahead.
I'll replicate some of that. Dan Conway, University of Arkansas. I've been at 8 universities and seen a lot of differences in cultures of the universities. We may think that they're commodity and exchangeable, but they're not. And culture does matter. As far as what skills students, I've been in and out of the business for 25 years, and the two things that our employers have always asked for, one is, do people collaborate well? And translated to tools, do they know how to use collaboration tools? Can they work together well? That matters, especially in a digital world where the risks can be profound. And then the second question is, can they learn on their own, a form of curiosity? Do you like what you do? And we had a local employer just gave us $195 million for data science to make sure that we had the skills. And when you ask them what they're looking for, those are what they're looking for. People who get along well and collaborate well, and people who are curious and enjoy what they do.
That's excellent. So if there are not other comments on that question, I'd like to transition into really unpacking that in a more tactical sense. What are the actual gaps that exist in educational programs for students, and what has to happen to fill those critical gaps?
So Cheryl, I could take that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely. Please.
So I'd like to piggyback on what they were mentioning with the critical thinking.
And please do introduce yourself just to the
Oh
audience.
yeah, I'm sorry. My name is Angie Schrader and I'm CEO of Flow State, which is a software development company here in Wyoming.
Excellent.
I wouldn't call it rural America, but definitely not one of our major cities either. So along with the critical thinking and the collaboration, I think learning to do requirements development, I think students are really good at being assigned a problem and going and solving it. But when I employ them, I need them to identify the problem themselves and define those requirements so that they know what problem they're trying to solve. And then once they get the work done, I think communication skills, it was mentioned just previous with the core competencies, but I think communication can't be underscored enough. Once you have those results, you need to be able to communicate what you've learned, what you've done with your team, but also with stakeholders, with potential consumers, and learning how to visualize data, communicate solutions is key. Otherwise, it just remains siloed and there's never any fruition of those results.
Great. And what would you suggest to actually fill that gap?
I was glad that President Seidel brought up the boot camp. I think the more opportunities we can give students to do project-based work, collaborative work, distributed work, where they get a chance to get their feet wet in these instances that they'll be faced with in the workforce, I think the better, so that they learn how to use collaborative tools, so that they learn how to solve problems on their feet before they leave academia, and they can hit the ground running when someone like me needs to employ them.
Excellent. Any other comments, responses, please?
So I'm Laurel Ballard with the Wyoming Department of Education, and I work on everything related to digital learning, computer science, anything in that realm. And I definitely wanted to kind of add on to what she was just saying, because we're in the process of working with our State Board of Education to figure out what does a graduate really look like at the K-12 level. And certainly there's our core content areas and things like that, but these are the things that are starting to show up in that, is that even students themselves are saying, I learn a lot of content, but I don't have a lot of opportunity to like use that content and really be able to apply it and those kinds of things. And so I think that's going to be a big piece of what we're going to be looking for. And what I hear from employers, I'm in the process of saying, hey, what do you really need from students, so we could get the idea of getting students into internships and those work-based learning experiences, so they have those opportunities to kind of, touch things and those kinds of things. And one of the big things that keeps coming up is you can kind of teach them some of the CS stuff. That'd be great. But what I really need are all of these other employability skills that people have been talking about. And that's what they're like, I can kind of teach them some of the other pieces, but I need them to be able to come into work, show up on time, know how to work as a part of a team, communicate and collaborate, right? All of those kinds of things. And so I think that's going to be a big piece. And I think it's a big piece of what we're going to see as education continues to shift in the state.
Thank you, Laurel. That is definitely insightful. I would love to hear from someone on the industry side to validate that and unpack that a bit more.
Anoop Nana
Please.
from AWS. I think, there's a lot of resonance here in the conversation so far. And I think what's really important to recognize is that software and computing has become a cultural phenomenon, right? And so having a global perspective, I'm seeing this cultural phenomenon in other countries around the world, right? I look at blockchain innovation as a true equalizer. It is the democratizing innovation as we speak. I think what's really important is that as we look to what is the student of the future, not only are they technically competent, but they're also trained to a degree to be business leaders, right? Up front, right out of the gate. And that's something that, from having hindsight of having to build an engineering and product and go-to-market team around the blockchain space, it's critically important that these factors kind of get rolled into as kind of an integrated outcome. So I'll pause there.
Please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kathryn Carlisle. I'm with the Blockchain Center of Excellence at the University of Arkansas.
Welcome.
Thank you. And one way that we try to attempt to fill this gap is we work with our executive advisory board members, our industry partners, and we host events that include our students and our local practitioners in the community, such as our annual conference. But thinking here, mostly our hackathon, where our industry partners provide these use cases that either are aspirational or currently being implemented as pilots within their enterprises. And we bring them in to mentor our students as well from the business college where we are currently housed, but also students across engineering and law school and different, disciplines and sectors across the university. We make these events open, not only to our students where this event is a part of the required curriculum, but also our community kind of at large to interact with these industries, to see the real world use cases and to problem solve together. And the outcomes that we've seen from the satisfaction of our industry partners with their end use cases to where the students have been able to take and commercialize their own ideas and their IP has just been very rewarding and kind of a point of success that we are hopefully taking forward and, enlarging and making the opportunity more accessible.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of corporate alliances, anticipating needs. Anyone else from the business community that wants to further support those comments? Okay, great. Oh.
I will just share sort of my vision that maybe some schools could take on, because I would love to see this, is what I want to hire when we're looking at hiring. I look at the whole person, right? I believe that social impact and business are interdependent. And so I want to see the whole person, not just what their degree was, right? I want to see what social issues are important to them and where they're spending their time outside of school. And I want to see that fabric in their whole persona, right? So I could go into LinkedIn and see all their credentials, right? In a self-sovereign identity, right? Their data is secure, but I can see, what not only is what important to them, what bug bounties that they have, hackathons they've been involved in, and what rewards programs that they're incentivized by, and that they have their own, solar panel at their house, and they're part of a tokenized, economy on helium or something, right? So I really would just be fascinating if there was some sort of program that could come out and profile these students in a way that goes beyond just their degree. And I think the universities could help drive that because that's obviously what they're getting educated on. They're going to universities for, but as a company that, social and business I believe are interdependent, and that's the future of, we get into DAOs and all these new autonomous organizations, that it's going to be critical that these students are, their whole persona is presented to employers. Sorry if that's a little deep.
No, great. Thank you, Pamela. I saw two hands. Rich Copcho.
Hi, my name is Rich Copcho. I'm the co-founder of SDK Tech. I'm on my 18th startup, and I mentor at a lot of universities, Colorado, UC Colorado, or UC Boulder, and CSU. And I spend a lot of time with students. And one of the issues is there's silos still. And those silos need to be broken down, especially with computing. Right here in UW, last year, we had 6 interns from UW working with us. And those were from all different disciplines. So it was very cross-discipline. And all of them had to have some kind of computing skills, but not all of them were programmers. They were working on different kinds of technologies, integrating different things, especially for this hackathon. There's a lot of forms that need to be integrated and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on. There's the digital assets that need to be created, and those are all computing based as well. So what I'd like to see from a business perspective in computing education is that we broaden that to have a real understanding that computers aren't going away, right? They're going to get easier to use, hopefully, but from K through 12, they need that kind of an education and integration with the technology from the start.
Thank you, Rich. It sounds very supportive of what you were saying, Kathryn, about the Blockchain Center of Excellence. Okay, we had one more hand back there. Please announce yourself.
My name is Autumn Bizon. I'm the CEO and founder of Ordinal Inc. And our company's mission is to quiet the noise of the supply chain by redistributing the risk with immutable self-publishing pallets. I grew up in a rural area. I have with me today my brother, Jason. We came from a town of less than 1,000 people. Our graduating class had 32 kids in it. And if it weren't for education, I could not have gotten out of what I felt like was my very small cage of a town. So what I come to say is we can't just have our students be ready for internships. I was lucky enough to achieve a position at, it was called NASA Sharp, Summer High School Research Apprenticeship Program. And the apprenticeship is something that in high school, I believe all students should have access to. They should have access to be able to not only go into an industry right away, but start partnering with those businesses who want to groom them through their educational experience all the way into being independent in an industry, potentially with them. But it has to start in high school. My mother did not graduate from college. Neither did my father. If the number one predictor is what your parents did, and your parents didn't do these things, there has to be a program starting in high school. And so please, please, please make it easier for businesses to come in and start working with these younger kids and helping them into education. In order to get to a university, the closest community college was 50 miles away. And if you don't have a car, you can't get there. And if you're going to go to university, it's at least 3 hours away. And then you have no money. It's just very difficult. So please bring people into industry right away and then teach them how to do it. That's my comment.
That's a great story. Would anyone please comment? Yes.
last lot of University of Wyoming computer science doing AI and ML. And I just want to piggyback on that because I think that actually, in my opinion, probably the biggest obstacle to computing education and education in general is really just money. As in, people can't afford it. We never even see them. And we want to educate them. In particular, as we heard this morning, continuing education where you don't just leave high school, but you continue actually doing this. If you can't afford this because you have to work 2 jobs to make ends meet, that's obviously not going to happen. Unfortunately, here in Wyoming, we are kind of a leader in that because our tuition fee is one of the most affordable ones in the nation, I believe. But still, we could do more, in particular with respect to scholarships and really enabling people to not only come here and start studying, but also while they're studying, maybe not have to do a part-time or in many cases full-time job where they have barely time to focus on their studies and then really end up falling behind rather than benefiting from all the other great things that we're talking about here.
I think that's very insightful. And Autumn, I would absolutely love to understand how you made your leap from the challenges that you faced, if you would be willing to share that. But yeah, just a little insight. It was intriguing. Well, people want to know.
All right. Well, I went to NASA SHARP and I did that. I worked at Boeing Integrated Defense Systems. I was on the campus at Cal State. And I loved engineering from day one. Math and science is all for me. I love logic and solving process. And so I worked really hard. I graduated salutatorian and I went off to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And I had an Air Force ROTC scholarship. And then I had a baby. So after that, I moved home with my mom. And I strung together 4 different community colleges worth of credits to eventually make it to Oregon Tech. And Oregon Tech is in Klamath Falls. It is very rural. It's where the cowboys and hippies unite. And at this small teaching university, they gave me the opportunity to study operations and statistical analysis, which just was a natural fit. So I said goodbye to engineering and I started working on process. So I graduated in 3 years, and it was from there that I convinced my husband to move to Chicago. And in Chicago, I just drank like a fish as far as seeping in knowledge. I joined the Supply Chain Management Professionals. I'm on the board of Governor State University's Supply Chain Innovation Center and Business Incubator. I'm supposed to know what I'm talking about when it comes to blockchain. So that is how I moved forward. And then from there, it was just constant connection and really, really feeling that need to want to have those conversations with people that make a difference. I found myself annoyed, wasting time unless I was moving towards the future. So I guess the answer is you keep throwing yourself into very uncomfortable situations.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're not afraid to step in and learn and be uncomfortable. So thank you for sharing your insight. Okay, so that brings me to the next question, unless there's a burning platform on our final question there. Online, anyone? Okay, this really ties into, I think, filling these gaps, and I touched on it briefly this morning with Frederick Regard, is that the diversity pipeline. So it's often characterized on gender or ancestry, but what we're really talking about is cognitive diversity, contributions of all points of view to drive technology outcomes. So I would like to bring it to the panel's consideration to how do we get better at ensuring there are more diverse voices in computing and especially AI? Any ideas on a huge opportunity?
It's Anoop at AWS. I think one of the things that's really critical to capture is that, and it sounds like, Wyoming is well on its way here, having alignment at the Department of Labor with the Department of Higher Education, with the Department of K to 12. Having that alignment, I think, is critically important. Driving a strategy across, a single unified strategy across that, so that we're actually creating the opportunities for a diverse, more richer work environment, I think is really important, especially as we lay out the plans for what education might look like, in the next 5, 10, 15 years, right? There are students, as we said, who are going to be graduating in 2030, entering the workforce in rural America, and they'll be, potentially be impacted by artificial intelligence, right? AI integrated with IoT. There's a whole myriad of what I call a confluence or a trifecta of technologies that are coming together. And it's really important that we lay out a plan, a comprehensive plan that says, there is new technology, there's always new technology, there's always innovation happening. How do we increase accessibility? How do we improve that? Not just for folks who can afford it, but folks who, as the point was just made, how do we actually lay out the infrastructure so that people can get to the education, right? I think that's really important. So I'll pause there.
So Laurel Ballard with Wyoming Department of Ed. I think that's really important. And I think that we're going to have to, if you really want to impact diversity, you're going to have to start really young, right? We know that students, like if you're just talking about women, right? We know that if we can connect to them in high school, they're more likely to take it in college. We know that we lose all sorts of students, not just women, but lots of different folks with the lack of exposure from elementary into the STEM fields once they hit middle school. And so you're going to have to start pretty early. I mean, for long term, and you're going to have to connect it outside of just, there's certainly in the K-12 system, people have not been able to effectively understand the difference between computing, like just understanding computing and being able to work and operate in that world versus I'm going to be the big software developer kind of person. And so I think we're going to have to do a lot more work on connecting to like different fields and some of those kinds of things. And the discussion about getting industry in early, that's going to be really important because they're going to see role models that are people, right? You get excited about things when people are really passionate about it, and your teachers maybe are passionate about it. I mean, it's right now in Wyoming trying to find teachers to teach CS and K-12, even though we're only a year away from the requirement, we still only have 40 educators in the state that are licensed to be able to, or endorsed to be able to teach computer science. And so we're far from that. And so I think, but it's going to be important to figure out how we can get kids really young excited about computing and connecting it to the things that they're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely valid. I believe you.
Thank you. Emma Jane Alexander, 3D Viz Center. I think we've already really addressed the main point, which is that the lack of cognitive diversity in our output is absolutely going to be impacted by the lack of diversity in our workforce. So at the other end of the pipeline, thinking about people that are ready and mature and ready to work, and then the employers that are ready to bring them in. What's impressive to see at the moment is a cultural shift in general, both in academia and in industry. And I will highlight in particular the excellent practice that's currently been put in place at the University of Wyoming. So the Office of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion are running what they're calling search equity advisors. And they're providing this opportunity to people that run a search committee if they want to help support the cultural change that's required to be able to break the cultural norms, to make sure that that net is cast as wide as possible when it comes to placing an advert for opportunities on campus. And then helping sure that through that recruitment and selection process, there's a very robust method to make sure that if bias is happening, that it's addressed and talked about. And that if there's some kind of, whether it's conscious or subconscious bias, and whether there's issues to do with equity, it's not about having the equity police on the search committee. It's about having an advocate for someone to talk about who is in the room and getting a look in and who isn't in the room getting a look in, and what can we do to widen that net. So thinking about the other end from education, when people are through it and ready for jobs, I think some kind of, well, I don't think I know, and I can see that there's a revolution going on in the recruitment and selection processes, which is incredibly important to our goal here.
Very, very insightful, please.
Jeff Downard, NAU and Kepler. I'd like to share an experience I've had serving as a Lego League coach. I think it's a wonderful model for thinking about all levels of education, K through 12, up through college and lifelong learning. Because I had a team, 12 kids, some brothers and sisters. The team was mixed almost evenly between girls and boys, and they're all at the middle school age. And what was striking about the program is that they were given a set of challenges. The particular year that we started out, it was a climate change challenge, as they had to develop a robot that could carry things around on what looked like an icy field. But there were about 9 tasks that had to be done in this field in about 2 minutes. But then they had to do a research project involving the robot. We let the kids pick. And they said, well, we got ultrasonic sensors. What can we use it for? And as we started to study, the kids figured out that we could use the sensors to put them on wheelchairs. And then we learned about how many people, for instance, with a diabetic background, which 2 kids on our team came from a family with a diabetic background, how many people with diabetes find themselves in a wheelchair from loss of vision. And so they figured out that the greatest risk that they face was wheelchairs backing up over things like curbs, going down stairs. So we tried to figure out how you would get a sensor to figure out where the stairs are, figure out where the corners and walls are, because they ultrasonics bounce off the 2 different directions and don't come back to the sensor. But by finding problems to solve, real world problems, as well as little miniaturized problems on a playing field, it was remarkable. There were different personalities on the team, but to see these young girls flower and to see them take on the challenges, naturally they divided themselves. The girls wanted to go and do the writing portion of it. They wanted to do the communication. They didn't want to be doing the program. But by the end of the season, they're like, I want to run the computer. I want to put the tools together with the little Lego blocks and solve the problems. I think that problem-solving skills, seeing it as part of an inquiry where they have to learn the experimental method and use it together with simple programming skills. What Lego League does to make that possible is they have a programming language that's entirely diagrammatic. I'm a great fan of using simple languages like that at early ages. You wouldn't need to start in middle school. You could start off in 4th grade because the language is that simple. Building those schools for the kids to learn those kind of abilities, I think is a great thing to replicate at the universities, to replicate beyond, as we know we have done with ongoing robotics types of competitions.
That's a great story. And I think you're really saying problem-solving opportunities and then buttressing there's before them. So absolutely good to hear. It ties into my next question. And actually, I'm going to ask the next 2 questions in the same sequence because I believe that they're paired up. And the next question is, how can we better prepare K through 12? We've heard a little bit from the Department of Education and on the robotics side. And then the second question is, what role would no-code programming play in such a role? And then we can unpack that a bit. As a burning platform on the K through 12 needs for computing, please.
So Anoop and Andrea, AWS, we've thought about this quite a bit, right? And how do we actually activate educators? And so we have programs where we will provide training for educators free of cost, instructor-led. And for those educators who choose to go on and become certified, there's a program in place there. And so, for us, it's really important that, we are helping actually create the environment in which everyone is going to be operating in, right? As it comes to, providing the education material, getting students up to speed on these technologies as early as possible. And so one of the things that we've done is put in place a program where we're training educators free of cost, and that's an investment in community for us.
And is that part of a corporate social responsibility program that Amazon does with schools and?
That is part of our public sector business.
Okay. That's excellent. So coming from Sony, I ran the corporate social responsibility, and we would do grants and provide coding platforms such as Coov to program for the autonomous robot program. And it was exactly the same experience that you had. It's practically exposing participants to that. So thank you for that. President Saidon.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to pick up on this. So we're undertaking some programs here. I saw Suresh here. I don't know if he's in the background or not. If Suresh is here, maybe he can come up and talk about the program, but if not, I'll just talk about it. The program that we're working with teachers to expose them to, school teachers across the state, to expose them to coding and robotics, and particularly building autonomous robots which is extremely exciting for the kids because it's more hands-on. Sometimes coding can be a little bit more abstract or more complicated for younger children, but to get them involved. And we just found this to be extremely exciting, and it's a program that we want to grow at the university in partnership with the schools. We met with the schools, the teachers over the summer on 2 lengthy discussion occasions, and we thought, could we combine that, say, with our boot camp that we're trying to build, that I mentioned earlier with Cardiff University and the community colleges, involve the schools as well, and then make sure also that superintendents of schools are involved as well, so they can actually see firsthand what's going on. It's great to have teachers, but then sometimes it just sort of is not understood at sort of upper levels of the administration and so on. So we're trying to create this pipeline. I think in the next year, we have an opportunity to really grow this program significantly here with potentially the advent of the School of Computing here. I'd love to think about how we might work with Amazon and others as we try to get more corporate sponsors for these things. And Wyoming's a great place where we might actually build a kind of a pilot program that I hope others would be able to emulate across the country, because we're small enough to actually put the pieces together and organize virtually all of them in one state. So it's a pretty exciting opportunity.
Absolutely. Brian.
So I'm Brian Shader. I'm in the math department, and I'm also helping the faculty at the University of Wyoming craft a vision for the School of Computing. And I guess one thing I just hope that we can pay attention to is make sure that people don't view computing as just a standalone subject. Just like with math, okay, I'm a math professor, but if you do that, then it's very easy for somebody to say, I'm not a math person or I'm not a computer person, okay? The world we live in requires and allows you to greatly benefit from the ability to use different tools. And we need to give our students the idea that these are just different tools. Sometimes you use theory, sometimes you use math, sometimes you use communication skills, sometimes you use art, and sometimes you throw a computer at it. And I think we would really do well if our teachers that we're training at our university and our students have this idea that these are just tools at our disposal. And you don't get to opt out of them. The world doesn't really allow you to opt out of them. It's how do you plug into them and use them to address problems of interest to you? And how do you use them to allow you to have a career and a life that's of interest to you?
Yeah, please.
So I want to kind of piggyback on that a little bit, Brian. Like, I completely agree. And we've been working hard. And I know, like, we've had teachers who have been working with Dr. Burrows and Dr. Borowczak on, how do you integrate computer science into some of the other content areas? But the reality of what schools are actually facing is they're being required to add another content area. They didn't get new funding, which I think if you could figure out how to do integration, it would be okay. But they have lots of teachers that are terrified of computer science, of it, or computing of any. I mean, like, I still have teachers where it's hard to get them to use the computer in the classroom. And so it's kind of interesting to think about that. And the reality is the way districts are setting themselves up is that they're all going to have an individual, just about all of them are going to have an individual teacher that's going to be teaching at the high school, middle school, and even at the elementary level, which there's no like even certification issues for teaching. If you're like a 3rd grade classroom teacher, just teaching, integrating CS, where I've seen some examples of it, but most of them are going to do it as a pullout, and I'm going to be a CS teacher. And so they're starting to set themselves up to be like this other content area rather than seeing it as a tool that you use in solving a lot of other ones. I will say we've been working on helping teachers through micro-credentials, right? Letting teachers demonstrate their competency in not just their content knowledge of computer science, but how do you effectively teach students that. And I have a teacher that's teaching actually a computing literacy class, right? So it's the Word and Excel and presentations and those kinds of things. And we've been working with her to show her like, hey, while you're working on Excel, here's all the standards around data analysis. So you can actually teach students like when you're using how to use a spreadsheet, here's different like tools and techniques around data analysis and those kinds of things, and trying to show them how to integrate within other content areas. I will say I've been doing, I've got like don't know, 5 or so language arts teachers at the secondary level, so middle school, high school, and they're fascinating to watch, like how they have been able to talk. We've been doing ones on pattern on computational thinking is one of our micro credentials that they have to do, and we're showing students how to actually use the computational thinking, the pattern recognition algorithms, all of those different concepts under there, and apply it within the context of writing an essay or some of those kinds of things. And it's been kind of interesting, and and one of the things that we're asking the teachers to do is have the kids think about, how else do I use this outside of the context of where I've learned it, so that they're able to use it in multiple contexts, and apply it throughout. So it's been kind of interesting. But I will say that K-12 is kind of setting themselves up like to be silos.
Can I interject? Thanks. Hi, Laurel. Nice seeing you. So I'm Mike Borowczak at the University of Wyoming. Worked quite a bit with Laurel, with Dr. Andrea Burrows and many of the people around the table. And the question originally is, what is the gap that we need to address, or how do we address it? And I think one of the major issues is we've talked a lot about integration, and we've talked about not having silos, but where do we value that? Within the K-20 educational system. Right? So we have teachers that are teaching all the things that they need to teach because they have standards that they need to address. But it is really difficult to layer in more things, as Laurel is alluding to there. And so it does get pulled out because there's fundamentally a need to change how we actually, what we're valuing. And that doesn't end at the K-12 level. That then comes into the university space. But we still have traditional silos of majors and degrees, and we have elitist attitudes around certain spaces, which reinforce this mindset and makes it really difficult to break through. How do we address diversity issues? We make it so that computing is accessible in whatever format throughout the curriculum in all spaces, but that takes resources. And I will hesitate I'm hesitant on the deficit model of educators needing more training and knowledge. They do, they want more, but that's, I don't believe, the fundamental issue. It's a time constraint. It is a constraint of all the other things they're being asked to do. And so we can do all the training and all the things. And we run many training sessions, right? We have professional developments every summer with hundreds of teachers in various spaces, but that doesn't lead to sustained change because it is difficult to somehow quantify and say, this is worthy of your time. Yes, we know it's needed, but when it comes down to it, it's not something that is valued throughout the entire system, right? Sure, we have senior capstones, we have individual instances, but realistically, it's not something that we value in other ways. We don't allow for individuals to come into the university space with outside knowledge that translates well into a future degree, right? We have degree programs that are very structured. Employers still, even though some of you are very forward thinking, are still looking for very common degrees on the outbound deliverable for an educational system. So looking at non-traditional degree systems or types is something that requires a shift in mentality. So there's my 2 cents. Trying to wrap a lot of the questions beforehand in one.
I know that was excellent. I wanted to touch on what you said on the diversity, equity, and inclusion side is about accessibility. And one thing I would, my opinion is that it really is making it desirable. I think there's a perception that what a computer scientist looks like. I have a sister that's a computer scientist, and she's one of the only women in her department. So it is this perception of what does that look like? What does that behave like? And what will that work environment be? And we know that companies, major corporations, multinationals that have government contracts have requirements for diversity and equity and inclusion. So they're looking to the university to help recruit and repackage and brand what it is to be able to change the world in a creative way using whether that's a code or no code. So maybe we can transition into the no code discussion, the pros and cons on that. Anyone want to start there? Maybe I'm talking too fast, huh?
Can I just go back to a couple things? One, kind of going back to the problem solving that was talked about earlier, and I'm going to say something obviously very controversial because I am, but if we think about problem solving and how children react to rewards and how adults react to rewards, and I think that's why we're all here, because we recognize the value of a reward system of a decentralized economy. And so the game theory concept, I think, woven in, I knew of a teacher who tokenized all of her grades for her class, and she was blown away by the impact of tokenizing their grades and a reward system associated with their learning. And so I think it's a mind shift change that has to happen. It's happening across America right now. You look at businesses that are going to be disintermediated, they're going to be gone. And they have to understand how this digital and physical world is being combined, and that there is going to be obviously certainly a tremendous amount of jobs that are gone, but a tremendous opportunity for our students. I want them to come into the university, yes, do your fraternity sorority, but sign up for a DAO. And your DAO is your 4-year program, whatever, DAO that's structured, that is your interest, that you want to participate in. There's a showing them this new microeconomy that is rewarding their work in a way that they're already a part of this new economy. And that's what we need to do with our children. They need to understand how their digital wallet will work in the future, how finance, how they'll be rewarded for their health. I mean, so many really interesting ways that we can weave in an educational system that is rewards-based. And I know that is extremely controversial, but I learned it from my son. And that's where, I went down this rabbit hole in 2014 because he kept telling me he was making money on his gaming. And I said, you can't go and buy a pizza with your Steam tokens. But I understood that that's his world, that he didn't need to get the greenback dollar to be rewarded for his programming that he was fixing, and he was getting tokens for that. So how can we create this educational system where we're really helping with the underlying new economy that they're all going to participate in, that they are already onboarding at a very early age, that's helping them and a parent hone in on those skills that their child has, so we can really help direct them into a job of the future that they will be passionate and they will make impact.
Yeah, Kathryn, I saw you vigorously nodding your head. Please take the mic.
Yes, and I always appreciate a good incendiary comment. I think what we call computer science today will really just end up being basic technological literacy, or as you were saying, digital literacy. Before the printing press, only elite members of society knew how to read. It was unimaginable for the average person because of the challenge of learning that type of skill, and the cost of printing something was too high. Before the internet, only mathematicians and researchers and engineers knew how to program code. The cost of having that equipment was only accessible to very few. And what blockchains especially and the internet has enabled is now an open source software economy. And that makes the marginal cost of sharing code virtually zero. And the cost of owning a computer today is as little as $100. So I believe the core skills we're going to see at all grade levels, like English, math, history, science, we will see technology literacy as a part of that. And I believe no code will be the gateway for most people into that type of education.
Excellent. Thank you. Brian, did you want to further expand?
This is great conversation, and I like, really thinking of no code and experiential opportunities for students is just providing as many ramps into the world of computing as possible. And I'll just say, going back to Laurel's comments, wonderful. And I actually think a lot of this is on the university's responsibility. I, as an instructor, have to find a way to give my students the opportunities to apply computing. And if we're going to make the School of Computing successful at the University of Wyoming, it's going to be a change amongst our faculty. And we're going to have to do lots of scaffolding to do that. But I think that's really exciting. So to immediately address these issues is hard. But I hope in 5 years, 10 years, Laurel and I can talk about, yeah, we've worked together and we've changed computing in Wyoming, and through that impacted the nation.
That's great. Please.
Emma Jane, 3D Biz Center. I just have a really brief comment on that. It's what Brian mentioned just then made me realize that one of the significant multi-generational on-ramps for computing is the Makerspace movement, where not only students at the university can go and take bite-sized digital credentials and suddenly get a badge in 3D printing, but young learners can go under 10 years old and take family members with them for community sessions. So that's a very significant on-ramp that provides a multi-generational approach to not making computing accessible, but just educating people as to what the whole interdisciplinary road for computing looks like. And I think that's just worth a quick name check. That was all.
Okay, shifting gears a bit and just doing a time check. This is session is scheduled to end in about 20 minutes. We have 2 questions left, and this one's kind of a big one, so bear with me as I walk through this. So this was mentioned multiple times today about the rapid deployment of technology over the COVID era. I think Gartner said it's a 7x innovation cycle in the last year and a half. What we could have done in 7 years, we've done in a year and a half. But as such, effectively, we've deployed these tools of tomorrow rapidly, but maybe what we've not done is really thought through the impact on policy, number one, to facilitate the rapid innovation, and 2, privacy, and especially as we talk about blockchain. So I'd love to have an open dialogue about the comments on the confluence of ethics, innovation, entrepreneurship, and how COVID kind of brought us here, the upside of COVID, if there was one. So I'll open it up to the floor.
Well, what I can share, again, this is something I'm extremely passionate about, specifically in regards to privacy and property ownership and property rights, digital asset rights, physical asset rights. We launched the Federated Learning Private AI Institute with Intel and Avast last year. And we've funded 7 universities, 4 here in the United States, 2 in Canada, and 1 in Europe, I think it is. And the focus of the Institute is to drive progress around federated learning, which federated learning, for anyone that doesn't know, is our ability to gather information from large data sets while we're able to keep proprietary models private, right? So your personal data is not exposed. There's a lot of issues right now with federated learning because there's ways that people can poison the data, and there's just a variety of ways that you can, steal data and information. So we are trying to fast track that initiative because so much data is now moving to the edge. How can we be assured that your information for your COVID, vaccine, data is protected, right? Your personal information is not altered or accessed. So it's something I'm really passionate about and excited that we're working with some of the amazing universities on doing a variety of testing on autonomous vehicles and devices to see if we can push this new computing that's federated right now at the cloud and moving it to the actual device. And we would love to work with University of Wyoming on our work there. So.
Excellent. Please.
I think one thing that's really interesting to see, and I'll share a story because Pamela shared a story in a bit. But one of the biggest challenges in machine learning is just the efficacy of the training data set. And I would go even further. What is the efficacy of the algorithm itself, the operating infrastructure that it's running on? How do we actually stitch all of this together so that we don't have to trust, but we have trust in the outcomes? right? And so, you know, as an experiment, and I'm going to switch gears, I'm going to be a dad for a sec. As an experiment, my 17-year-old decided that he wanted to understand and have better visibility into breast cancer research. And so he wanted to understand, well, what are the data models out there? How clean are they? Are they effective? Is there enough data? And his observation was that there isn't enough data. It's got holes in it. It's incomplete. And so what he actually did was he started a nonprofit to teach 8 to 13-year-olds machine learning, artificial intelligence. And through a DAO, he crowdsourced teachers from all over the world whose only outcome, right, as a DAO output is that we're actually creating better data sets for machine learning, right, for breast cancer research. So long story short, you know, the incentives don't necessarily have to be aligned with money, right? The incentives can be, as Pamela was saying, what are you passionate about? How do you actually leverage the technology? And in a true DAO model, you know, what he was able to do was generate terabytes of data that, you know, is currently sitting in my high performance cluster in my garage, but, you know, we'll find a way out there at some point. So I'll pause there.
I'll help you. That's awesome.
Yeah, that absolutely is pretty impressive. Brian, you look like you wanted to comment on that.
This is so exciting. To me, I'll go back to different pathways. So to think of the ethics issues that technology brings, the blockchain brings, and people that are going to go do public administration and go out to cities and agencies, they need to be aware enough about the inner workings of these to be able to make good decisions and to explain those to public. So they do need to have a reasonable computing background, even though they will not be formal computer scientists. And so I think all of these issues actually are really promising, that there's opportunities out there for us to educate all students on some general computing principles, ideas. And I'll even say, ultimately, all citizens need to be aware of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So does that translate, Brian, and as if I don't recall system, as they have to consider restructuring and funding in different areas to rise to meet those needs? It seems like there's some very practical things like that might need to happen. That's a yes, I think.
You know, absolutely. I mean, I think one needs to use this carefully, but technology is disrupting all aspects of our world, and it's disrupting, and we should find ways to address that for our students, for our state. And we are the ones, I think, a university and through state partnerships are the ones that should be leading this. We can't expect it just to happen. And so I really think that the vision that the president's laid out and our faculty are beginning to look at is really promising. But you use the word revolution. I mean, that's a lot of upheaval, and a lot of people are uncomfortable about it, and they don't see themselves in it. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But boy, I hear the people around the table from all different points of view, different areas, and they're expressing the needs. So we have to do something for the state.
Absolutely.
Cheryl, if I could jump in on the question.
Oh, please.
So we were talking about COVID and what's been going on with this, what was it, 7X acceleration and development. You know, we were talking about the coding standards in Wyoming a couple of years ago, and I think people were kind of dragging their feet and coming around to that computing mindset that we've talked about earlier. But I think COVID really provided a catalyst for that and has been a real shot in the arm. You know, in a matter of months, which we would have never thought possible, a computer went into almost every home, and people were throwing up broadband access where it wasn't provided before, and people were finding ways to take courses online and learn about things online. And so we've had this huge momentum in reaching that democratization of computing that Frederick was talking about earlier. And I think there's a confluence here. Not only are we starting to talk about having a computing mindset and what does the workforce need to look like in the future, but there's also this coincidence that we've had this catalyst. And I think there's a huge opportunity in taking advantage of that. The democratization of a computing mindset is going to provide in this industry what democracy provides for people, and that is more eyes on it, more people involved. And when we have more eyes on it and more people involved, then we'll start to address those privacy issues and ethical issues, and do our training data sets include a broad swath of the community and stuff. So I'm really optimistic that all of these things are kind of coming together at just the right time. It's a very exciting time to be in the industry, to be in education, and I'm super excited that all of us are in the room together talking about them at the same time.
Yes,
please. I spent some time in Silicon Valley, and I was always between Cisco Systems and some Mountain View companies. I was always invited to address new hires in data and ethics, and I taught that at Notre Dame, entire courses on just that topic. And going through e-commerce, it was an important thing to talk and to bring cases in, and going through social networking, talk about what worked well with e-commerce and how ethics played a role in creating meaningful data sets and so on. What I've found with blockchain, I've actually never seen such excitement from the students before, because they see this as a foundational technology of equality. And they ethically understand the failures that have gone on. They see Goldman Sachs making 100 million a day, and they see 8,000 Haitians under a bridge, right? They know what's going on. And I would maintain right now what I see, I've never seen excitement like this, because they now can innovate, and they can co-innovate with the amazing Nigerian programmers, by the way, they're fabulous. They can collaborate with people in Israel and South America, and they're the ones who are going to teach us on some of these topics. But I've never seen this degree of excitement before, and it is wholly based on equality and inclusion. Diversity is sort of the output of that. If you are respectful for people and respect their viewpoints, which is what the digital ecosystem that blockchain has initiated for that generation. Is just unbelievable, the energy that they have right now, because they see this as the way to change the world that's fundamentally broken. So I think we have a lot to learn from the students right now as regarding ethics.
I think that's great, and that's consistent with what I've experienced. It's, social good for the employees that I've had. That's what they're motivated by, and if they can use those skills along with technology to achieve social good, that's better than a monetary incentive, I think is what you're saying. Okay, so
privacy is going to take another day.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That's an important topic.
All right, well, we are coming in for a landing here, and I want to just round out, and maybe President Seidel, I could ask you to see if there's anything that in this dialogue that hasn't come up yet that you think is important to put out to the community while we have each other here, or any other comments or thoughts in our last 10 minutes.
Well, thank you. I find myself getting quite excited as well. I mean, I'm quite excitable in this general area anyway, but it's so easy. But this is extraordinary what we're hearing. And I had the privilege yesterday, spent the day with Charles Hoskinson as we went out to Carnegie Mellon where he announced a new center there for formal mathematics, which is a separate point, but very exciting. But we talked a lot about the democratization of computing, and he's working in the company, and many of us, in fact, we just heard, working extensively in Africa and in South America, where there's a sense that there's not only opportunity there, but sort of a new way of looking at this. And I just kept thinking, we should be applying this thinking to the state of Wyoming. and we have this opportunity, I think, with the people in the room and the many things that are happening here to point out that rural America can actually be a leader in this way. And I think we have all the elements here. As I said before, we're small enough that we can basically organize all of them. So I find that very exciting. And I think I want to point out how inspiring it can be what Wyoming is doing. So I came here from the University of Illinois last year, which is sort of a ground zero of computing in many ways, one of the world centers of computing, even relatively rural area of Champaign-Urbana, which is significantly larger than any town in Wyoming, by the way. So, but anyway, the thing that really caught my eye when I was preparing to come out here to think about University of Wyoming as a position for me was the K-12 CS education initiative. We were struggling in Wyoming, in Illinois, to actually build a statewide program. There had been requirements for computing at, say, Chicago public schools, but they hadn't really thought about the fact you can't just require it. You have to have teachers who actually have been trained in it, and there's a culture around that and so on. And there basically wasn't a place in the whole state of Illinois, in spite of all its amazing computing prowess, to actually do that. So Wyoming was a leader, and it was an inspiration to me, and it made me really think about the opportunities here in the state of Wyoming for me personally. And I think, the more we can promote this, that we are really thinking like this, and we have a lot of infrastructure in place when it comes whether to K-12 or all the way to blockchain legislation, and that university picking up a school of computing and then working with all the community colleges. It draws a lot of attention to the state, and there's a lot we can do on top of that. So I think the future is really good if we can capitalize on this moment here.
Absolutely. Very, very bright. I think it's not widely known, and it should be what Wyoming is doing. If I could ask you, what keeps you up at night? What do you think the near term and by priority solution should be, next steps?
I think on this, ideas are really good now, and we have a lot of momentum in terms of building the partnerships, but we have to figure out how to execute on these ideas into tangible steps. We can't boil the whole ocean at once. But we have to keep our mind on that's where we're going. So what can we do here as a community to take a number of initial steps that build on where we are now that we can actually execute on? That's the key point.
Absolutely. Well, we certainly have a lot of the right influencers in the room to make that a reality. So let's open it up to final comments. If you didn't get a chance to speak, our online participants or any of the panelists, and I know we have a lot of folks in the audience that are kind of hiding back there. This is your time. We have 6 minutes left. And so let's take 3 questions and then close this out and break for lunch at 12:15. Who's up? Crickets.
The new from AWS again. So I'm just really impressed with what I'm seeing here in Wyoming. And I would say you've got some stiff competition coming your way. I was in Houston last week, and they're gunning for the PR rights as well. So really excited to see what's going on here. It's brilliant. The approval of the DAO was powerful as a message on its own, and just really, really excited, happy to support any way we can.
Jeff Downard, I think it's good to put ourselves back in the position that Charles Hoskinson, Vitalik Buterin found themselves in when they were, goodness gracious, 19, 22 years old, and think about where they are today. That when they were young people, they had this idea that they could build something. And then they broke up. 8 founders went different directions, and now we have a Cardano and a Polkadot as well as an Ethereum, et cetera. And as these systems grow, they're giving rise to an ecosystem that we're trying to understand. Imagine if you were in the shoes of a Vitalik Buterin or a Charles Hoskinson today. What would you do? What kind of learning would you be engaging in order to be able to solve the problems that they're trying to solve with the resources they have available to them? And we shouldn't think that these are their problems to solve, because you can see that they want to encourage an entire community of people to grow around these tools. Because as we started off at our first introduction, It's the older generation and the old Greek proverb who says that they need to plant a tree for the next generation to have shade. But what we're really doing is planting not just a grove of trees, we're planting whole new forests. And we're trying to understand the potential of this forest to grow. And it's difficult to see how that's going to happen. Having the experience of being now, 55 years old, having worked in ethics and law and having taught it and having to try to start a company in the blockchain system, that it's difficult to see where this is going and where you'd want to take it. And if I put myself in their shoes, it's remarkable how many questions there are and how hard they're going to be to answer.
That's great words. Final comments before we close.
I'll say, I spent a lot of time in Illinois. I sent punch cards to Champaign-Urbana back in high school, which was a long time ago. Time in Northwestern and Notre Dame's Chicago campus. It's hard to get things done in that state. I know you're not going to ever say something negative about it, but it is really hard to get things done in Illinois, and the same with California and the same with Florida. If you're going to get things done, you need a state that is agile, that people get along with each other, and you need someone like Caitlin Long. And the reason I'm in Arkansas is because it's a small state, and if I want to see the governor, I'll send him an email and go visit him. But you can get things done, and it's part culture, but it is, what's going on at Wyoming is unique. And my kids, I was one of the first 20 Bitcoin miners, so my kids grew up with crypto and paid their own way through college with it. And they're all like, oh, get your picture taken with Vitalik and get your picture taken, with Charles. And I'm like, I want my picture taken with Caitlin Long, because she's the legend in my mind. And if you want things to get done, you need somebody like her. You need a culture, but you need someone like her. So I'm very grateful to have met her in person yesterday.
Great words.
Briefly, this is Russell Cann with Core Scientific. We're a very large cryptocurrency data center operator, and we are looking very hard at a big facility in Wyoming. I just want to jump on and say, if so, I'm going to need about 75 data center techs and network engineers and everything. So, and if we get there, really looking forward to working with the University of Wyoming in the blockchain initiative there. I was able to visit in person last year. This event didn't work out. We're get there this week, but really looking forward to what Wyoming's doing in the blockchain space, particularly in the cryptocurrency digital asset space. And we think it's leading the nation, and we've been following it. We're very interested, and we're very interested again in actually having a pretty good sized facility there. And some of our folks are already working with some of your economic development folks and power companies on finding sites. So, which means we'll need some employees.
Hey, Russell, come on back out for dinner. We had a great time last year.
I know. I really missed it. I wanted to get out there. Just the timing couldn't work out.